Modulation. It's a fairly vague term, but today I'm here to help you understand some of the most popular modulation effects in music production. We'll take a look at tremolos, flangers, choruses, phasers, and a few other creative modulation effects, all of which operate on a similar underlying principle to add movement and interest to your mix. Thanks to Sound Toys for sponsoring this video and supporting audio education. We'll be using some Sound Toys plugins to demonstrate these concepts, and you can download a free trial of the plugins using the links in the description below the video. There's a basic principle behind most modulation effects. In general, an effect is applied to an audio signal, and a variable of that effect is modulated or changed over time. Let's start with a very common modulation effect called tremolo. A tremolo effect will modulate the amplitude of an audio signal over time, basically changing or modulating the volume up and down. I could achieve a similar effect by turning the volume knob of a guitar up and down. But what if I wanted to automate the work of my fingers on the volume knob so I can focus on guitar playing? Because trust me, I can use all the help in that department that I can get. Rather than using the volume knob on the guitar, I can place a tremolo effect into the signal chain, such as this tremolo pedal. Again, this pedal is designed to modulate the amplitude of the guitar signal over time. But what controls are used to make that happen? First, you'll notice it's got a control for the depth of the effect, how much the amplitude will vary from the original level. The rate control determines how frequently the amplitude will be modulated. Increasing the rate control increases the frequency of the modulation. And finally, there's a wave control that determines the shape of the modulation over time. In this case, between a triangular wave and a square wave. To better understand these controls and how this effect actually works, let's dive into the Tremolator plugin by Sound Toys. This is a very customizable plugin, as you can see, but it also offers a great user interface that helps in understanding the mechanics of tremolo. A key concept to understand related to modulation effects is the idea of using an LFO, or low frequency oscillator, as a control signal. The LFO isn't actually a part of the audio signal chain. Instead, think of it as a control voltage that changes the variable we're trying to modulate. In this case, the amplitude of the audio signal. Clicking the tweak button in Tremolator, we expose a window that makes the LFO concept much easier to understand. Similar to the tremolo pedal, we can select the shape of the modulation to suit the situation: sine, triangle, square, etc. We can adjust the rate control. When we adjust the rate control, we see and hear that the modulation occurs more or less frequently because we're adjusting the frequency of the LFO that controls the modulation. As the LFO enters a positive phase, the tremolo effect turns the amplitude of the audio signal up. When the LFO enters a negative phase, the tremolo turns the amplitude of the audio signal down. Hopefully you see the basic principle of using a control signal to automatically modulate an effect. Next, let's look at some other effects that modulate different variables. Let's say you have two copies of the same signal. If the two copies are aligned in time, they'll sum together, creating an increase in level. The reason for this being that all of the various frequencies will be aligned and therefore constructively interfere with each other. But if we delay one copy, the results will be much different. A given time delay will put some wavelengths out of phase, causing cancellation. It will put some wavelengths in phase, causing summation, like before, and it will create various other interactions at other frequencies. And all this creates an audible effect known as comb filtering. This isn't really modulation yet at this point, but we could use an LFO to modulate the delay over time. This is the foundational principle behind the flanger and chorus effects. This is where I want you to think less about strict definitions of each effect and instead grow a familiarity with the sound of each effect so you can identify the line between flanger and chorus for yourself. While there isn't a dedicated flanger or chorus effect from Soundtoys, we can use Echo Boy, a delay plugin, to create these effects. Let's start with the pseudo flange preset. The distinct swirling or whistling sound we hear is a result of the changing delay time. The frequency that sums together changes based on the delay time because different frequencies have different wavelengths. Notice how this effect was achieved within the preset. The echo time was set very, very low, and then that echo time is modulated by the wobble control. The wobble feature will vary the delay time based on the depth selected. The feedback control is also important for achieving this effect. With the feedback control turned up, there isn't just one delayed copy of the signal interacting with the original, but there are multiple repeats all interacting with one another. Let's compare this to the CE1 chorus preset with an Echo Boy. The swirling effect is more subtle here. You'll notice a longer echo time is being used, which shifts the frequencies affected by the comb filtering. And you'll also see that no feedback is used. But again, the wobble effect is essential here because that's what modulates the delay time. There's another variable, aside from just delay time, that we can hear modulating in both of these effects, and that's pitch. The original term flanger was coined because the effect was originally achieved by playing correlated signals on two tape machines and then slowing one tape machine down in relation to the other by applying pressure to the flange of the tape reel. When you slow down the tape speed, you create a pitch shift because you're widening the wavelengths and therefore decreasing the frequencies. And when the tape speeds back up, you're doing the opposite. The Echo Boy plugin behaves similarly when it's in time mode. If we switch to note mode, changing the echo time won't impact the pitch of the signal. However, in time mode, we do hear a pitch change when adjusting the delay time. When you combine all of these features, a delayed copy of the signal with modulated delay time and pitch, you end up with a very customizable chorus or flanger effect from an already very powerful delay plugin. On a more traditional chorus effect, such as this guitar pedal, we see some familiar controls. The effect level control is similar to the wet-dry control in Echo Boy. This balances the level of the original signal to the copied signal, and therefore controls how extreme the interactions will be. The EQ control on the pedal is just a tone control, but the rate and depth controls are similar to the rate and depth controls for the wobble in Echo Boy. There are definitions out there for the strict differences between chorus and flanger, but in my research, I found it's much more about the quality of the effect than the technique used to create it. Download the plugins, experiment with these effects on your own, and develop a familiarity with them for yourself. Getting better at audio and mixing is about so much more than just information. That's why we created the Audio University membership, to give you access to courses, practice exercises, and expert feedback. Join with the link below and get instant access to the new Mixing Essentials course. I'm looking forward to meeting you inside the membership community. All right, back to the video. Another common modulation effect is the phaser. It sounds somewhat similar to the flanger and chorus, but there's a key difference. Rather than modulating the overall delay time across all frequencies, resulting in various degrees of phase shift throughout the spectrum depending on that delay time, a phaser will create a phase shift only at an isolated band of frequencies, or at several isolated bands. Said differently, rather than delaying the whole signal, a phaser will create a phase shift only at a portion of the frequency spectrum, and then modulate where in the frequency spectrum that phase shift occurs. It might be helpful to look at some graphs to understand this. First, we can see the impact of a chorus effect on a phase graph. This graph shows phase on the y-axis and frequency on the x-axis. Without getting too deep into how to read a graph like this, notice that the phase distortions extend through the spectrum with a chorus, because all frequencies are being delayed. On the other hand, let's look at a phaser, like the Phase Mistress plugin, on a phase graph. This time, we see that the phase distortions are more isolated. And by adjusting the style of the effect, we can add more phase shifting filters with various qualities depending on the desired sound. In a phaser, the frequency at which the phase distortion occurs is the variable that's being modulated. And we can adjust the depth of that modulation with the mod control. Okay, I'll admit the phase and time-related modulation effects are not the easiest to wrap your mind around. And I'm still learning about these things myself, so I hope I didn't leave you feeling even more confused than before. I urge you to experiment with the effects in your own DAW, as this will bring you far better results than scratching your head about the details of how each effect works under the hood. By this point, I hope you're starting to see that there are infinite types of modulation effects. You just need to modulate a variable, or multiple variables, over time. What you choose to modulate is limited only by your imagination and the control and automation capabilities of the tool you're using. An example of another variable that could be modulated is panning. In fact, this isn't too different from the tremolo effect from earlier in the video, because panning is a function of amplitude relationships between the left and right speaker. Using PanMan, we can automate the level of the signal in the right versus left speaker, creating the illusion of a moving sound from left to right. You can also use a plugin like Filter Freak to modulate a variety of filters, such as low-pass filters and high-pass filters. So far in the video, we've used an LFO to control the modulation, but you can even experiment with different techniques, such as modulating the effect controls with the envelope of the input signal rather than an LFO. If you're interested in trying these effects in your own session, you can do so with the links below the video. In the next video that's on your screen now, we're taking a closer look at delay and the various ways it's shaped music as we know it. I'll see you there.